The theory that I've put down is more a sort of technical theory than a political theory. But the basic argument for decentralisation is making government more responsive to the needs of the people because it's closer to them. This is a new public management type argument. So decision makers at local level have better information about local needs, hence can tailor policy implementation at least to local priorities and issues, and possibly allocation of funds to local priorities and issues. There's potential for local input into devising locally appropriate interventions where there are particular challenges, and potentially there's greater accountability as citizens can access decision makers directly. They can go to their office, which they can't do in the capital. In practice, the literature may be changing, but quite a lot of initial literature was coming up with sort of disappointingly limited evidence for pro-poor impacts of decentralisation, often due to the fact that the sort of theoretical conditions that I've just mentioned, identified were not met in practice. A big question which I mentioned yesterday, actually the person who first, as far as I was aware of it, first wrote about it in international literature was Pranab Bardhan from India. Are poor groups able to influence local policy making and investment, or actually are these processes captured by the influential people in local areas? Is it the larger farmers who are determining what goes on, or is it the urban citizens in a particular county who have the loudest voice over expenditure and priorities? So it's a very important question, who actually does influence things at local level. There is still inequality at local level, and who has the most effective voice there. There's an awful lot of experience of lack of skilled human resources at decentralised level, particularly in the early years of any decentralisation programme. This is obviously something that over time can be tackled by capacity building and training. You do sometimes have to overcome the reluctance of people to actually be based in an office out in a county or a district, particularly if they previously might have expected to be in the capital. And you have low tax bases in many counties or many districts, especially where it's in poor areas, and local government authorities may not be given new tax-raising powers as part of a decentralisation process. They therefore remain dependent on central funding, which may be limited, it may come late, which obviously means when citizens want to hold them accountable, they say, well, but I couldn't do anything because I didn't get the money from the centre. And there's really nothing they could do about that. And it also means that the centre continues to have quite a say in what actually goes on at local level, because the centre is providing the money. And so where is the accountability really? Is it to the central government, or is it to the local citizens? So these are all things that have come up in the literature as challenges. As I say, some of them over time can undoubtedly be tackled. It means it's not an immediate panacea, but there are things that can be worked on. And there's also a key question to ask in relation particularly to the agricultural sector, is which services are better devolved to local government level, which are better retained at a higher level? At the moment, the notion here, I think, is that policy and monitoring and evaluation is at central government level, almost everything else at lower government level. But just to take an example, not particularly an agricultural example, there's often a breakdown that national trunk roads stay as a national government thing, feeder roads become local. That seems fairly intuitive and fairly logical. If you come into agriculture, think about agricultural extension. The actual extension staff become employees of a local government. Their day-to-day management is local. They may well be looking to address particular local needs and priorities. That surely is one of the advantages of decentralisation. But you're not going to have every county running a training programme for new extension agents. And who's going to be providing the new supply of these people? That's a function that is in some ways is going to have to stay, be above the local level. It's a national public good that needs to support the local units. And so it should somehow reside somewhere higher up the system with the responsibility for that. Similarly, agricultural research doesn't neatly divide into county level or district level or anything else. You have agroecological zones which have research centres that are looking to generate new technologies, new practices that can be disseminated, but that's not at a county level, that's at a larger level. So again, you somewhere need flexibility for some of these things to be retained at a high level. And there's a design question as to what is it that should remain at the higher level and what should be down at the lower level. I don't know the details in Kenya, but it is just an important question to ask. Now, the literature on the politics of decentralisation, I'm not aware of as much of this as perhaps exists, but what I have seen makes an important case that the politics that motivate the decision to decentralise in the first place are also important in determining the performance of decentralised structures afterwards. And I come back to a question which I asked again, which I posed yesterday. This is again a question of those with power being asked to give up some of their power. The people at the central government level have control of resources, of decision-making ability, and they're being asked to give up some of that power. So why would they want to do that? Okay? We have to always ask that question. Why is it in their interest to do that? And so my Malawian colleague who I work with on the input subsidy with, Blessings Chinsinga, was telling me about how the Malawi decentralisation process, which with some donor backing in the early 90s made a certain amount of progress, then stalled for 10 years because the president basically feared that decentralisation would enable opposition parties and groups to develop strongholds at local level. They would win local elections. If they then delivered better services, you've established local strongholds for the opposition around the country. So there was just no progress on the implementation of the decentralisation programme. Their president didn't think it was in his interests to do that. Why, therefore, has it been done? And I don't have as clear an answer to this as I ought to. But let's take Ghana case, and I'm sort of looking to Mark here as I talk, because Ghana was one of the first countries, along with Uganda, to really go for decentralisation in a big way. So early 90s, and it was a reasonably concerted effort to decentralise things to districts and district authorities. And I think, Mark, I'm right, initially it was 5% of the national budget that went to districts. Okay, so modest, but it was a serious attempt at a time when most other countries hadn't been doing anything. And it was under President Rawlings, and it was around about the time of multi-party, but I can't remember exactly whether it started just before or just after, but it's that sort of... It was before that. Even before multi-party. And my understanding is that the president's core supporters were in parts of the country which had historically been slightly marginalised politically. They're sort of periphery, both geographically and politically. And by giving them power to have more control at their local level, the people who'd missed out in the national level allocation of resources were therefore gaining control of some resources at local level. And it was a way of building his own coalition of support in these other parts of the country by decentralisation. So there was a political alliance that he was forming with people in different parts of the country. Okay, so this is sort of the opposite of this. Okay, but that was the calculation that went on. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a similar calculation in Uganda, but I don't know the details well enough. So so yes, first of all, there are motives for decentralising, and they do affect the performance of the administrations afterwards. Actually, what happened in Ghana is interesting. It's a bit of a mixed story, because it was early within African countries to go for a fairly serious decentralisation effort, but actually a lot of power still remained at central level, and over time the debates in Kenya have become in Ghana have become clearer and clearer on this point. That there's a problem that there's too much control retained at central level, and there's two aspects to that. One is the funding one I've already mentioned. 5% of the budget is not actually a lot to enable decentralised administrations to really make a difference. So they're still dependent on the centre. And in Ghana, you have a district assembly and you have a district chief executive. Got that terminology right, haven't I, Mark? And the district chief executive is still a presidential appointee. So you've got the bottom-up elected district assembly, and you've got the top-down appointed district chief executive. And there's obviously certain tensions there, but there's also the ability of the president still to have a fairly direct input on what happens at district level. So there was a bid to gain support of groups, but actually centralised control was still retained. And that is causing problems in the functioning of Ghanaian decentralisation and the ability of decentralised authorities to really be responsive to local needs. Mark, I'm sure you'll have a chance to comment in a minute on that. But this fundamental question is a really important one. Again, let me try and now say what I have picked up through discussions with political economists, Kenyan and UK, based on the Kenyan devolution. And I'm sort of linking it to concepts that we had yesterday. So I was explaining the basic political settlement of coalitions of regional interests competing for power, and then the sort of champions of that historically, getting ministries of sources of rents. And the one big problem that was identified was it was effectively a winner-take-all situation. And if you were in the winning coalition, you got quite a lot of the sources of rents, and your areas received quite a lot of attention, and if you were outside, you did much less well. And I talked a little bit yesterday about the sort of ups and downs of different agricultural parastatals depending on whether their area was really in the winning coalition or not. But the bigger problem of winner takes all was that there was therefore so much pressure on you had to win the election. And we had violence in at least 3 elections, and 2007-8 was a sort of watershed moment, as you all know. Land in Rift Valley being a sort of flashpoint, but there were wider issues. And one of the major ideas in forming the drafters of the Constitution was we have to somehow deal with this issue in order to reduce the future potential for violence. As long as it's winner takes all, people are going to fight at the time of election. So how do we deal with this? And the notion was that actually we take a lot of power, or quite a bit of power, out of the centre down to these county levels. And they're given, I think that's what the Constitution says, they're given a sizable amount of money at local level. And it takes the heat out of national elections, or at least that's the intention, because even if your area, your part of the country, your group, is not part of the winning coalition, you don't have access to all the rents that come from central government, you still have access to the development funds and the rents, if you're a politician, at county level, in the counties in your area, even if you're on the losing side nationally. And because there are 47 counties, and I showed you the sort of number of sizable groups, all of the main people groups in the country should have 2, 3, 4 counties where they can reasonably expect to be in control of those funds, or individuals from that group can be expected to be in control of those funds, whatever happens at the national level. And so you will have many groups can then win at some level and have something to do. And if you were not in the winning coalition nationally, you concentrate on your county level politics for 5 years and you build your base to then wait for the next election. But you've got things to be getting on with. You can still be making progress at local level if you want to. And there's a paper that looked at this and how many of Kenya's people groups might be in category 4, where they might be in the losing coalition nationally, but also they don't really win any counties. There were very few in that box. And so most people somehow or other are satisfied. And polling, which I've heard reported, has suggested that this has been quite popular, and the phrase "it's everyone's turn to eat" is one that's been used. Instead of the winners, it's our turn to eat. Now it's everybody's turn to eat. So even if you lose nationally, you still get some chance at having a control over public funds. According to the people who were in the drafting part of drafting the Constitution, one of the outcomes that they didn't expect at the time was that the governors very quickly established themselves as the dominant people in each county. You have senators who represent the county in one tier of parliament, you have governments, you have then the elected authority in the county. Their expectation, I think, was that the senators would be the powerful people, and more people, I believe, contested the position of senator than contested the position of governor in the last election. I think that's what they told me. But the governors very quickly mobilized amongst themselves and established themselves as the key people in this devolved constitution. But the result has been highly competitive local politics, and it looks messy. So I'm an outsider here, and I don't necessarily look at all the mess, but I know that it looks very messy. The mess is, in part, an indication of the competitiveness of this system, because you have the current governor, you have the senator who may actually realize, I should have stood for governor rather than senator. Okay, next time I'm going to go for governor. You have the MPs who realise how, they used to have constituency development funds and they used to do lots of developmental stuff. Now the governor has control of those finances, and you have other people who perhaps weren't ready to contest in the last election who are ready to contest now. And so that there's a lot of effort to try and jockey for position and preparing for the next election, impress potential voters. Where there's been misuse of funds, there's numerous impeachment processes in the courts, as I understand it, because these people may all have incentives to impeach their rivals to make it easier that they can get elected next time. Okay, so there's lots of people who appear to be misusing funds, but there are also people who are emerging, and this is only the first round, remember, this is our first experience with this. There are already people who are emerging as what I might call populist developmental governors who are saying, vote for me because I get things done. Okay, and this is in a way the positive outcome that you're you're looking for. And these things, they look messy, but if they contribute ultimately to this outcome as a result of this competition, that's a good thing. And some of these guys are investing available monies in roads and other things. As I understand it, there has been a mess, which many of you may be much more familiar with than me, in that there was initially due to be a 3-year transition phase of central government functions to decentralised, which got abandoned at the last minute, and there's been a scramble to work out how central ministries relate to counties. And the process, the time that was supposed to take place to get that sorted was sort of short-circuited, and you're having to do it after the event. And I know that some of you are finding that challenging, but that's a one-off challenge which hopefully will be resolved in due course. So, agricultural trajectories. This is just a way of trying to help frame some thinking about this. This is Kenya focused, and I'm not saying which way it's going to go because I don't have any information base to do that, and Steve is the one with the crystal ball. Okay, not me. So I'm suggesting there can be positive dynamics that could emerge as a result of this. There can be negative dynamics that could emerge. Which way it goes, you'll have better insights than I do. And I've suggested, what does this do for central and county level dynamics? So let me start at the county level. And the positive case is that despite corruption, which probably many of you are aware of, these very competitive politics at county level do lead to enhanced provision of local public goods. Okay, through the emergence of these developmental governors who are looking to make their careers through being governors who deliver. At a negative level, I'm not sure whether this is emerging yet and whether there are restraints in the laws that would prevent it from doing that. But if there's a chance to raise local revenue, in other countries, one of the key ways of raising revenue has been taxation on agricultural supply chains. This was a big issue in Tanzania. It emerged as a big issue in Uganda at some point. And you can end up with a desire to generate local revenue, impeding the movement of goods and undermining efficiency either of national food markets or even export supply chains. Okay? And both Tanzania and Uganda have had to step in and take action to prevent that from happening. So it's just one to flag. I don't know if it is an issue, but it's a problem that can emerge. Now, what happens at central level, this is much more, even more tentative still. But effectively, the problem leading to the violence in 2008, which the decentralisation or devolution has tried to limit, is the competition for rents. And all the rents were controlled at central level. And now they've been shifted, a lot of them have been shifted down to local, not all. If you can get a shift in focus of rent distribution down here, plus the new constitution contains a few extra checks and balances on the behaviour of ministers and others at central government, then perhaps you can get a stronger focus on public good type activities at national level. Okay, that would be a beneficial outcome. The disadvantage might be related to one of the points I made earlier, that actually the ability to coordinate some of these national public goods is actually lost because you get the division of responsibilities between centre and local wrong. So that could go any way. The last thing to say actually is just something that Steve mentioned to me earlier, and he may make further comment on this in discussion. Steve was telling me just in the break about the Bolivian experience with decentralisation and how competitive local politics became the sort of mobilizing basis around which Evo Morales built his support base, and eventually challenged for national politics and became president with people who had previously been excluded from effective participation in politics. And the local electoral processes were the basis for that. And there are various ways in which, over time, if you have competitive local politics, they can ultimately influence what happens nationally and make a big change to national politics. So, in Ghana, there is a discussion amongst political scientists at the moment about we need to reinvigorate our local politics because we have 2 established parties and it's impossible under the current constitution for a third party to effectively challenge them. So if we want to reinvigorate our 2 national parties and get them more focused on performance, what we need to do is to create a space in local government levels where third parties and fourth parties can come up and start showing that they deliver and make a difference. Okay? And that's a debate. There was a review of the Constitution a couple of years ago, and those were arguments which were being put forward. I don't think anything was done about them, but people are realizing there's a potential for local government to give space for new actors to come to the stage and eventually become national actors. In Brazil, one of the programs you may well have heard about, a social protection program which is now famous throughout the world, is called the Bolsa Familia Social Protection Program, one of the biggest social protection programs in the world. President Lula was responsible for taking this and really scaling this up in the 2000s, but actually this policy was built on innovations that occurred at local government, municipal government level. I don't know if it goes back to the 80s, certainly the early 90s. And these ideas developed at local government and were captured nationally and eventually had a big influence on national politics. And actually that program has been very central to, was very central to his election and re-election as president. So we might think about this in the short term, what's it doing for service delivery? In the long term, you might expect this actually to have a much more profound effect on your whole politics and policy, even at central level, than you're currently thinking. But I know that's not exactly where you are now. You're thinking about how do we deliver services, but there is a bigger, longer term picture to come as well.